Back from the dead.
Chapter 4, Torrent and Shadow. The descent into the ravine was less a path than a controlled plummet into chaos. What might have been a narrow game trail in drier seasons was now a treacherous sluice of mud, loose shale, and slick, black rock veiled by layers of sodden leaves. Each step was a gamble. Kenjiro moved with the fluid economy born of years of disciplined practice, yet even his balance was tested. He used roots like handholds, braced himself against the shivering bark of trees slick with rain, his senses straining against the growing roar from below and the fading, yet still terrifyingly clear, yelps of the hounds from the ridge above. The air grew heavier, colder, thick with the raw scent of disturbed earth and the chilling spray rising from the unseen torrent. Behind him, Akari was a study in desperate tenacity. Her borrowed cloak, heavy with water, snagged on grasping thorns and low branches. The fine, ruined silk beneath dragged at her ankles, weighted with mud. Her breath hitched in painful gasps, lost in the symphony of the storm, but she made no cry of complaint. Kenjiro felt the fierce, trembling grip of her small hand on his obi, a constant reminder of the fragile life and heavy burden entrusted to him. Twice, her feet shot out from under her on patches of smooth, water-worn stone hidden beneath the leafy detritus. The first time, he caught her arm, swinging her back against the slope. The second, she pitched forward, only stopping her fall by slamming her hands into the cold mud, momentarily vanishing from his peripheral vision before scrambling upright again, her face streaked, her eyes wide but resolute. One mistake, Kenjiro thought, the phrase echoing the grim finality of a sword stroke. That is all it takes for either of us. They broke through the last line of skeletal, dripping trees and stumbled onto a narrow bank of churning mud and loose scree at the ravine's bottom. The sight and sound that met them stole the air from their lungs. Before them raged the mountain stream, transformed by the deluge into a liquid avalanche. It wasn't merely water. It was a furious, roaring entity, a brown-gray monster thick with foam, violently churning mud, and unsettling debris, whole branches thick as a man's arm. Clumps of earth torn from the banks, leaves, and unidentifiable refuse swept from higher ground. It crashed over unseen boulders with percussive force, throwing plumes of icy spray high into the air, filling the narrow, rock-walled canyon with a cold, drenching mist that clung like a shroud. The ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with the sheer power of it, the noise of physical pressure against their ears, like the tearing apart of mountains. It felt less like a river and more like the hungry maw of some ancient, angry god. Kenjiro-san, how can we? Akari's voice was a wisp of sound, instantly devoured by the torrent's deafening roar. She looked utterly overwhelmed, dwarfed by the scale of the natural fury before them. Kenjiro's gaze swept the scene with rapid, practiced assessment. Crossing directly was unthinkable. The current would pluck them up and smash them against the downstream rocks in moments. The far bank was a sheer wall of wet rock and shadow, offering no purchase. Upstream led back towards the pursuit. Downstream, following the water's edge, was their only conceivable path. It was a desperate gamble, trading the certainty of capture for the high probability of disaster, but it was a choice. Use the chaos against them, the tactical part of his mind whispered. Become part of the storm's confusion. We follow it down, he yelled, his voice strained to cut through the din, pointing along the narrow, treacherous bank where the water surged and eddied. Stay close to the edge. In the shallows, the water, the noise, it will hide us. Move. He didn't wait for her response, knowing hesitation was their enemy. Gripping Akari's upper arm firmly, drawing her close to his side, he took a bracing breath and plunged into the stream's edge. The cold was a physical assault, an icy fist clenching around their legs, driving the air from their lungs in a shared gasp. It felt less like water and more like liquid ice, instantly numbing skin, seeking entry through every layer of soaked cloth. The current tugged immediately, a greedy, powerful undertow trying to wrench their feet from the slippery, unseen rocks that formed the stream bed. Kenjiro planted his feet wide, leaning hard into the flow, every muscle in his legs and core straining against the water's relentless, brutal force. He pulled Akari almost behind him, trying to shield her slight form from the main push of the water, one hand maintaining a vice-like grip on her arm. Progress was a brutal, staggered crawl. They moved from one precarious foothold to the next, fighting for every inch. Sometimes the water swirled only around their knees, allowing a few cautious, wading steps, their feet sliding on smooth stones covered in slick algae. Other times, the bottom dropped away abruptly, plunging them waist-deep into churning eddies that threatened to lift them bodily and spin them into the main channel. The sheer effort of staying upright, of forcing their legs against the powerful current, was immense. Kenjiro deployed the bamboo shin he'd kept tucked in his belt, using it like a third leg, probing the murky depths ahead, testing the stability of rocks before committing their weight, occasionally jamming it between boulders as a temporary anchor against a particularly strong surge. Akari, despite her terror, moved with grim focus. She instinctively held the arm clutching the precious lacquered box high, angled away from the main flow, trying desperately to shield it even as she stumbled and fought the current's pull. The world for her had shrunk to the deafening roar, the paralyzing cold that seeped into her marrow, the terrifying push of the dark water, and the solid, unwavering presence of Kenjiro's hand gripping her arm, his back a bulwark against the chaos. The roar was omnipresent, disorienting. It hammered at their senses, drowning out the hounds, drowning out rational thought, leaving only the immediate, visceral struggle for survival against the cold, the current, and the unseen hazards beneath the surface. A large tree limb, stripped bare of its leaves, swept past them suddenly, rolling end over end in the current, missing them by mere feet, a stark reminder of the river's lethal power. Cold was no longer just a sensation. It was an invasion, creeping up their limbs, rendering fingers clumsy, stealing strength, promising a fatal exhaustion if they couldn't find respite soon. Then disaster struck. As they navigated around a large, half-submerged boulder, the rock Akari stepped on shifted treacherously underfoot. Her grip on Kenjiro's arm wasn't enough. With a small, choked cry instantly swallowed by the torrent, she lost her balance completely and vanished beneath the churning, opaque brown water. For a heart-stopping second, Kenjiro saw only swirling foam where she had been. Pure, cold dread lanced through him, not just for the girl, but for the mission, for the trust Fujiwara had placed in him. Without conscious thought, driven by raw instinct and the ingrained reflexes of his training, he plunged his arm deep into the freezing murk where she had disappeared, his fingers closing desperately, blindly. He felt the rough, soaked fabric of her borrowed cloak. Hauling with all his strength against the current that fought to keep its prize, he dragged her sputtering and gasping back to the surface. Water streamed from her hair, plastered across her face, which was ghostly pale in the dim light filtering into the ravine. Terror swam in her wide eyes, mixed with the shock of the cold immersion. She coughed violently, struggling for air, but her other hand, miraculously, still clutched the lacquered box tight against her chest. "Hold on, Akari-sama, stay with me," Kenjiro urged, his voice rough with strain and relief, pulling her closer, half lifting her towards the slightly shallower water near the ravine wall. She nodded weakly, shivering so violently her whole body seemed to vibrate. Just as he helped her regain shaky footing on a narrow patch of gravel near the cliff base, a flicker of unnatural light high above snagged his attention. He snapped his head up, eyes narrowed against the spray. Torches, not one, but 3 or 4, bobbing like malevolent fireflies along the ridge they had descended moments before. Figures moved behind them, dark silhouettes against the storm-darkened sky, peering down into the roaring abyss. He thought he saw the glint of metal armor or perhaps a drawn blade. Were those Sato's men? Almost certainly. Had they seen the momentary struggle in the water? Impossible to tell through the gloom and the driving rain that had begun to intensify again. But they were there, watching, searching, knowing their quarry was somewhere below, trapped in the river's deadly embrace. The feeling of being exposed, pinned between the lethal current and the hunters above, spurred Kenjiro with renewed urgency. "Faster! We need cover," he commanded, his voice barely audible but his intent clear. He pushed them onward, forcing their protesting, numbing limbs to move, deeper into the shadows hugging the base of the cliff. Ahead, the ravine seemed to curve slightly. Through the spray, Kenjiro spotted a potential sanctuary, a place where the cliff face jutted outwards sharply, creating a deep overhang. A cluster of massive, ancient boulders, tumbled down from the heights eons ago, deflected the main force of the current, creating a pocket of slightly calmer, though still turbulent, water behind them. It wasn't a cave, merely a deeper shadow, a recess perhaps only 6 or 7 feet deep, but it offered concealment from the ridge above and respite from the direct assault of the river. "There," he yelled, pointing towards the dark cleft behind the boulders. Gathering their last, dwindling reserves of strength, fueled by adrenaline and the proximity of the pursuit, they fought their way across the final few yards of swirling current. Kenjiro practically dragged Akari the last few feet, scrambling onto a narrow, uneven ledge of cold, wet rock that rose just inches above the waterline behind the largest boulder. They collapsed onto the cramped ledge, bodies racked with uncontrollable shivering, soaked to the bone, utterly spent. The roar of the main torrent was still immense, a deafening thunder just feet away, but here in the hollowed-out space, it was slightly muffled, less overwhelming. Icy spray still filled the air, coating them constantly, but the direct, bone-jarring force of the current was gone, deflected by the massive stone sentinel shielding them. Huddled together for shared warmth that barely existed, they gasped for breath. Akari's teeth chattered so violently it sounded like stones clicking together. Her skin, where Kenjiro could see it in the profound gloom, had taken on a frighteningly pale, almost blue tinge. He quickly ran his hands over her arms and torso, checking for broken bones or serious injury from the fall into the water. Nothing seemed broken, only scrapes and bruises added to the insult of the crushing cold and exhaustion. He noted, with grim satisfaction, that her grip on the lacquered box remained unyielding, tucked protectively within the inner folds of her ruined kimono beneath the sodden cloak. The box itself felt damp through the layers of cloth, but intact. Kenjiro risked peering cautiously around the edge of the sheltering boulder. The torches on the ridge seemed to be moving further downstream now, their light growing fainter. The figures were less distinct. Perhaps the angle hid them now. He strained his ears, filtering the omnipresent roar of the water. He could no longer hear the distinct baying of the hounds. Had the roaring water and the drenching rain finally confused the scent, or were the dogs simply too far away now to be heard over the cascade? Did we lose them?" Akari whispered again, her voice hoarse and trembling, sounding impossibly small in the vast, echoing space. For this moment, Kenjiro breathed, allowing himself to sink back fully against the cold, unyielding rock behind him. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally, but the coiled readiness remained deep within. "We have bought time, but they know we came this way. They will search the banks downstream." He looked at Akari, her slight form trembling beside him, her face barely visible. Her resilience was remarkable, but the signs of exposure were becoming alarming. "We cannot stay here long. The cold is as much an enemy as Sato's men." They were momentarily hidden, shielded by rock and roaring water, but they were trapped in the belly of the storm-lashed ravine. Freezing, exhausted, hunted. Dawn and the relative safety that distance might bring felt impossibly far away. The weight of the heron's feather, the weight of the murdered lord's trust and his daughter's life, pressed down on Kenjiro, heavier now than the mountain itself, colder than the icy torrent raging just beyond their fragile sanctuary. The night was far from over, and the shadows held more dangers than just Ishikawa's men.